90 shares. In an election, Zuck gets 100 votes and public gets 90 votes. That means in any election, depending upon the election type, he can dominate. If all open seats are elected separately, he can choose anybody he wants to any board seat. Why? Because he has the majority of the votes. Such companies are called dictatorial. Obviously, in our regular life, that has a bad connotation. But that is not necessarily the case, uh, especially for innovative companies. Whether or not you agree with Zuckerberg's view about virtual reality and all that other stuff he's doing, he doesn't have to worry about market punishing him. He has a vision, he wants to implement that vision, and he doesn't want to deal with the approval of small shareholders for that. Small shareholders know this when they buy that stock. So presumably they apply a discount for that stock. But that's a choice. That means if there is bad news, does Mark Zuckerberg have any need whatsoever to hide that? He is independently wealthy anyway. He doesn't need to sell his Facebook shares to finance his way of life. So if Facebook shares goes down 30%, who cares as far as he's concerned? Because he still believes in his vision, so he's going to go ahead and implement it. Or if there's good news, does he have any reason to hype that? No. Turns out the quality of the information disclosure is actually a lot higher based on empirical evidence for dictatorial companies. They have no reason to hide anything. Who's going to take over Facebook? They don't have the votes. You can buy the entire 90% that is public. You cannot get rid of Mark Zuckerberg. It is impossible. The board cannot fire Mark Zuckerberg unless he wants to leave because he's embarrassed or anything. On the other hand, you guys remember what happened to Sam Altman, the old chair of OpenAI? The guy probably started the whole ChatGPT business. I mean, now OpenAI, Microsoft invested quite a bit in it, but they fired the guy. The guy who developed ChatGPT was fired from ChatGPT. Why? Because he didn't have control over the board. I mean, I have no idea about the guy, whether that was deserved or not. But independent of that, he founded the damn thing, but he could not stay there. Apple fired Steve Jobs back in early 90s. Steve Jobs. He was one of the three founders. One of them retired, the Woz, and Steve Jobs was pretty much the brain behind Macintoshes and all the other stuff. But Apple wasn't doing well. They were not a dictatorial company. So Apple board fired Steve Jobs. They begged him to come back in around 2000. And if he had not and started iPod, Apple would have gone bankrupt. But in that case, information quality coming out of Apple wasn't that good. Once Steve Jobs came in, Apple became more of a dictatorial company. Suddenly, the company was able to implement this vision. Whatever you think of Apple products, you cannot deny that they were very successful. Okay? That has to do with the regime. But when they were democratic, they weren't that successful. So democratic does not necessarily mean good things in boards. Now, in terms of elections that are kind of two basic kinds. One is called straight elections. Every open seat is competed separately, just like the House elections, right? In Kentucky, we have 6 House districts. In each district, there is one election. The majority vote holder wins it. That means if you control 50% plus one share, you get to pick all the directors. Sometimes companies appoint independent directors for either social responsibility purposes or for looking good. But even dictatorial companies do it, but it is kind of up to their discretion. Google is another example where there are differentials in voting powers. Now Google has three classes of shares. There are the founder shares owned by the Google guys, as they were known, Sergey and Larry. I think they have 10 votes per share, but I don't think combined they own more than 10% of Google these days. Even the remaining public shares, there are two classes of Google shares. One of them has a ticker called Goog. Those shares have voting power. The other shares, Goog L, they do not have voting power. Obviously, the class of shares with the voting power sells at a slightly higher value, but not by too much. But the right to cash flow is the same. If tomorrow Google says we're going to sell ourselves to NVIDIA, Sergey and Larry is going to get only 10% of the revenue. That's it. They have a lot more votes, but that doesn't mean they get to benefit more. There's also so-called cumulative voting. Here, each share, given their classes, of course, are allocated as many votes as there are open seats. And you are allowed to distribute those votes any way you like. Let's do an example. Let's say there are 4 open seats. And you have 100 shares. That gets you 400 votes. There can be up to 100 candidates for those 4 seats. When the votes are done, the top 4 vote holders, are going to get those seats. You can give all your 400 shares into one guy. You can distribute it equally over 4, or you can distribute it equally over 20. It's just entirely up to you. But in this case, if you control 1 over n plus 1% plus 1 share, you guarantee 1 seat for your preferred candidate. Let's kind of see it. Suppose there are 500 shares available. and you own